My name is Jill Costa. Welcome to Baldor Bite 2022, you guys. I'm the marketing manager at Baldor Specialty Foods. And this Baldor Bite has been a long time coming. We are so excited to see you guys. Thank you guys for all joining us. I hope you guys are having a great time meeting all of our vendors and our partners out on the floor. I hope you guys enjoyed our first panel. Weren't they amazing? Yes. And I am super excited to introduce to you guys our second panel of the day. We're going to be talking about the future of kitchen culture, and we're going to be meeting some of our panelists who are chefs and restaurateurs who are leading the charge in their own kitchens. Our moderator today is going to be Dana Cowin, who needs no introduction, but it's my job, so I'm going to do it anyway. Dana Cowin is a tastemaker and innovator in media, food, and branding. Her work spans advising creatives, founders, nonprofits, as well and nonprofits, as well as creating editorial through podcasts, social, video, zines, and books. Drawing on more than 20 years of tastings as the editor-in-chief of Food and Wine magazine, Cowan curates collections of extraordinary comestibles, SAT word for you guys, bringing attention to the remarkable women behind the products. An award-winning influencer in the food world, she is a sought-after speaker on topics from trend spotting to lifestyles, motivation, entrepreneurship, and of course, why we're all here today, amazing food. She has a long-standing commitment to supporting opportunities for economic growth through culinary training. She's on the board of the Food Education Funds and Hot Bread Kitchen, as well as the Food Council of City Harvest. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you guys our panelists today and moderator, Dana Cowin.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? Me? Yes. Okay, I'm going to start with a couple of questions for all of you. I'm Dana Cowin. You just heard that ridiculously long bio of mine, but for the moment, I'm the moderator. How many of you work in kitchens? Okay. How many of you run your own kitchen? All right. That's good to just know who we're talking to. This is an amazing group of humans who have been running kitchens, working in kitchens for quite a number of years. Victoria Blamey, who just opened in New York City, Mina. Everyone has to go. Cortlandt Street. I think we have to just clap because. Kiki Louya, who is a chef and an amazing activist, who you're going to hear more about that work. Ayesha Nurdjaja, how'd I do?
You got it.
Yeah. It has a D in it, so it looks like it's going to be nerd, because, nerdy. But has anyone been to Chouquette? Live in New York, been to Chouquette?
Thank you.
Amazing restaurant. And Melissa Rodriguez, who you might know in the past from Del Posto, just opened Mel's in that space and has a couple more amazing restaurants to come. So we have so much history here on this panel, and I'm going to start because we're talking about the future of kitchen culture, but I want to just set a little bit of context of the kitchens that this incredible august group has worked in and what the problems that we're solving for are. What are some examples of kitchen experiences that we never want to see again? What are those? And then we're going to turn to the positive and talk about all the things that we can proactively do in kitchens to change cultures going forward. Who wants to jump in? Otherwise, I'm going to call on you.
This about situations that we don't want to go through again?
Yeah, exactly.
I have a couple.
Go for it.
Well, I remember one when I was working in England at a 2 Michelin, and someone.
Can you guys hear?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear.
Great.
I can hear me, which is a lot.
Good.
Okay. I got burned really badly with hot oil on my foot, like 30 gallons of hot oil, and they refused to take me to a hospital because they thought I was whining, and I ended up going after service, and it was pretty bad. So I think situations like that I wouldn't want anyone to go through, and it sounds like pretty dramatic, and I think it is pretty dramatic in general. So yeah.
Kiki? No.
No, I didn't think so. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, there we go. So for me, I think the most traumatic experience that I had gone through was I started out actually in front of the house when I was about 18 years old. And when I was working at this one restaurant, there were 2 different kitchens, upstairs and downstairs. And whenever I would walk by the downstairs kitchen, there was a hallway off to the back. And, you know, there were some lewd comments being made here and there, and that's just kind of, you know, you let it roll off your shoulders. But there were several times that I was actually pushed into that hallway and groped by some of the back of the house workers. And I was young and I didn't know how to say no or how to defend myself. So I just kind of kept it quiet and thought that I had to deal with it because it's what happens. And when I told a friend of mine who I also worked with, she said, yeah, it happens. So that was that.
Definitely something we don't want going forward.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible. I don't know if my story. I don't know.
You need a mic.
I need a mic. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I don't know. There are so many stories to tell, but I think one I want to focus on is basically no one ever mentored me, and I think that's really important because I started at a very young age in a kitchen where I think only me and one other person spoke English. And I never had someone sit me down and say, this is going to be your path. This is how you become a chef. This is how you move a station. It was mostly like work as much as you can for as many hours as you can until your limbs are falling off, regardless of burns. And I remember one day dispatching 3 dozen lobsters and then juicing 10 cases of grapefruit. And I remember on the way home, my hands just looked like lobsters. They were like puffy and red. And so I guess, like, as we talk about in this panel, it was more like I didn't have the leadership or the mentorship that I once wished that I did, and trying to change that now.
Yeah, I think we all have many stories, and many probably we don't want to talk about, but I have a few. So I once had someone that I worked for tell me that they almost did not call me on my resume because of my last name, because they thought it was a dishwasher, which is a very odd thing to say to someone. And I also almost had my finger amputated once because I got a really bad infection that went out of control really, really very quickly, and I wasn't really encouraged to leave work to go do all those things. So.
Okay, so I think, you guys, did these stories sound familiar to you from the kitchens that you've worked in? Yeah? All right. And I mean, hi to all of you, but, So I think the question really is, like, knowing that there are these stories repeated in restaurant after restaurant, what is it that we can really do? Because there's so much that can be done, and I think we have some suggestions. There's no answers, there's just models of change and ways to behave. So I think, I guess I'd like to start the conversation about communication, because I think that, in many of the cases, what we're talking about is where communication failed, where someone tells you what you can and can't do, where someone doesn't mentor, and like, what is the role in your kitchens of communication, and is that one of the things that is sort of at the forefront of how we change this conversation going forward, or how we make change in the kitchen culture going forward?
Since we're going in order, I'm just I'm like a good student. So I feel like it's so true that there's no really answers straight away. I do feel like this is probably one of the trickiest times in our industry. I think it's one of the most difficult times to open a restaurant and actually have leadership and also inspire people. I think sometimes people want to believe just one side of the story, and actually on the other side, there's a lot of hard work that you have to do.
Do you want to describe those two sides?
Well, I just think that, social media, has given you a very different sort of image of what the industry is like and what the work is supposed to be. I think I've been working, this year will be like 18 years working. And I am not saying that people have to work 18 years to get their restaurant, because I hope it's not going to have to happen for such a long time. But there's a lot of hardships, hard work, and resilience, and for sure things that you give up. And sometimes, even though these days we're trying to have a better communication about how to understand your staff and trying to manage their expectations at the same time, sorry, there should be something called accountability. And I think these days it's really hard to, put that in place. So I think communication is key in every relationship. I think personal or work. And in general, therapists are like so rich right now because everyone fails at communication. And we fail to actually say what we want to say. We fail to convey the message in the right way. And I think, at least for me, I'm not saying we have an incredible way of doing it, but it is a one-on-one. We try to sit down and with everyone that we work with and try to understand where they come from. But to be honest with you, there's a lot of psychology to put in place, and sometimes we don't have the right tools to do that, and also not the time. And these days, everyone knows that we're understaffed and working more than 100 hours when you're a manager. So I believe it's about understanding the expectations of the job and understanding where people are coming from and how to see their set of skills. Try to put those into different jobs in your kitchen. I also understand that for people that want to work in food, in the food business, not necessarily everyone's equipped to work in a kitchen. And I think those conversations are not happening these days.
So that's sort of where you land, to have the conversation at the beginning and
I think it's
the
kind of like what
expectations are set.
Ayesha was saying. It's like mentoring goes in many different ways. And one of them is trying to understand what someone is good for.
Okay.
And someone is not good for A, Y, and then the other person is going to be really good for B and D. And trying to see that, it's a great asset, but at the same time, you're not trained all the time to do that. So you need to figure that out in years of working in kitchens,
Other.
Sure.
I'm
I'll
sorry
take
that
this
it's
one.
going linearly, but it's also not just this way, it's also alphabetical.
So I think I'll put on my advocate hat, an
And
activist
we'll explain
hat.
what you do as the advocate.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I'm the outgoing executive director of Restaurant Workers Community Foundation. So we advocate on behalf of restaurant workers across the country. Also chef, former restaurant owner, soon to be again restaurant owner. And so I think where I'm coming from in this conversation is both as a chef and owner, but also from the worker perspective. And I think that, Victoria, you hit the nail on the head in a lot of ways in terms of you have to be really clear and concise with what you're looking for. At the same time, from the worker perspective, I think that what is not always communicated adequately is what is expected, right? So I think that as restaurant owners, having an HR department is an intense luxury that a lot of us cannot afford, just plain and simple. But yet there are a lot of policies and procedures that we need to document. And so in the story that I had told earlier about sexual harassment, when I was front of the house, and what I had experienced, there was no policy, there was no person to go to, there was no way to document it, there was no HR department, right? So there, it had never been communicated to me how to address those kind of issues, and what steps would be taken once I did. And so I think that there's a lot of resources out there. I'm happy to share several of them. I will shout out Oyster Sunday as kind of an extension of your in-house team, where they do provide a lot of these resources. They can provide HR service, they can provide compliance service, they can do everything from data management, technology, support, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are some things that are at a cost, but a much lower cost because of their network, that we can essentially elect into as restaurant owners and chefs. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that.
I'm just curious, how many of you outsource to third parties? Because that's what this is. Like, you're outsourcing HR and you're outsourcing, not many. So like Oyster Sunday is an interesting model, and there are others. You were also talking about an employee handbook, I think, that you had created.
I did. So years and years ago, I pieced together an employee handbook. I essentially just went around and got various resources, free resources that I could find, old employee handbooks that I had found from not restaurants, but from say, nonprofit organizations, corporations, whatever I could find, and tried to put together my own, of which we used in my restaurants. And it was good to have something documented. Mind you, we didn't have everything. It wasn't an exhaustive employee handbook, but it was this working document that I could essentially add on to year after year. And I learned a lot through the process. I learned about how to better take care of my employees, and also how to communicate things better, which I think is really, really important from every perspective.
And then you'd offer to share if it's something that people want. So if it's something that you want to see, just look at what an employee handbook looks like in the hands of someone who's pieced it together for resources over time. Kiki's very generously offered to do it. You could reach out to her on Instagram if you're not going to reach out to her after this.
Where are we?
we're meandering, to be honest. But the initial thought was conversation, communication is the starting point for improving kitchen culture. And in what way have you seen communication in so Victoria's saying communication setting, what the job really is, and
Right.
Kiki's like, you have to have ground rules and handbooks, and that's helpful.
Right. I think in this time, people talk about the pandemic as if it has passed, and like the change has happened, and now what? I think the change is just ever going. In order to have really great communication, you have to have the time for it. As a chef of 2 restaurants, I have 0 time to do anything, barely do my hair, let alone to have conversations. So I've now tried to implement between 2:30 and 4 o'clock dealing with my employees or making the time to have communication. It was so easy in the day to be like, tell a sous chef, okay, get this done, this is what's changing now, and then keep it moving. But a lot of the communication that I am giving to these sous chefs are not just about cooking.
Yeah.
They're about scheduling. They're about how to deal with an employee that's upset because they didn't get to see their daughter for her 2nd birthday. And how did I know that if we didn't communicate to each other? So I have a door open now between 2:30 and 4. Which is really difficult, to be honest with you, because as much as we talk about, the 4 of us up here have been in the industry for about 15 to 20 years. And to make a change where you're sitting down talking to one-on-one, it's hard as a chef to understand how valuable that is, because it's almost, you feel like you're not adding value to your business, right? We're not running around, we're not changing things, we're not talking to the front of the house staff about tonight's new dish or whatnot. We're actually making the time for our employees. And I think when we were talking a few days ago about this, something hit me when I came back from the little break from the pandemic was hospitality starts from within. And it starts from when you're working in a restaurant, someone sends a dish back and they're like, oh, it's salty, or I don't like it. We're so quick to what can we get this person? Do we get them an entree? Do we invite them back for a free dinner? What do we do for our own employees? And what I noticed is that a lot of them want time. They do want definitely time away from the restaurant, but they also want time to speak to their chef and ask them questions. What is my role? What is my trajectory in this restaurant? Or how do I go about this issue that I'm having at home that's leaking into my performance here, and I just want to let you know that. So I think finding the time, as chefs, we wear many, many, many hats. But this, blocking out this time has been really useful for me. I feel like it's established relationships, establishing a different culture in the kitchen where you can talk to someone. I'm definitely not a therapist or licensed, nothing. I can make a mean shawarma. But sometimes, just showing that you care means a lot.
I think that I learned a lot about how to communicate with people watching other people poorly communicate. I had a good portion of my career in a kitchen where I was the minority in many ways. I didn't speak the main language that was happening, and so I quickly understood that communicating needed to come from many, many different paths, not just through language, and it really alerted me and opened my eyes to understanding how to do that and why it's important. So for me personally, with my own staff, I maybe over communicate, and I encourage them to do the same. I do a daily debriefing, I guess, with my entire staff every day, and it's essentially a platform for any of them to discuss anything that they feel needs to be communicated, or to know that we're kind of there on an individual basis as well. I expect my management team to participate in that. It's not easy for everyone. I think that communication and understanding your employee and what they need takes a certain amount of vulnerability, which from our end is not always the easiest thing to do. But I do feel like if you are encouraging that amongst your staff and around your people, and you're setting that example and putting your foot forward on that, that people will follow you, and that this type of communication, getting to know people, getting to know what they need, being really upfront about what their position is and what their trajectory is, becomes a lot more easy, and it becomes less of like, we didn't talk about that. It becomes this checklist of things that we all always talk about. The other thing with our daily meetings is that we try to keep them really human. I don't need to know anything about your personal life, but sometimes if I share something with you about something I ate over the weekend, or maybe some really complicated conversation I had to have with a family member, all these things help people to understand that they too can have those conversations, and they too are able to do those things. So I try to keep that floor of communication as wide open as possible. It's not easy. It's a lot of energy from my part, but I also feel it to be incredibly rewarding. So I'm very happy to put forth that much energy towards that.
Yeah, it seems like when you talk about communications, it actually touches every single thing that interests us. One of the things just going forward and looking at the challenges of Kitchen's past, Change for Kitchen Forward, is addressing issues around mental health, right? It's been a critical issue in the industry. And there's lots of different ways to look at it. Again, no one solution. But I know that each of you in your own restaurants have a way of approaching like the whole person, which we've touched on a little bit. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Again, I don't think we have the solution, and clearly I'm not a psychologist. That's not what I studied, but I try to, make sure that I'm in tune with the people that are working. I think sometimes what we're not touching here is that you also do have some people that should not be working in your restaurant, and sometimes they can be also not a good influence for the rest of the team. I think there's also a point when you have done everything possible for that person, and at one point you need to choose the team, not just that individual.
I think that you have a stipend though.
Yeah, so that's what I want to say. Actually, we do have a stipend of 150 called Wellness. To be honest, it's about anything that anyone wants to spend for, it can be a massage, it can be therapy session, it can be any kind of podcast they want to listen to. It doesn't matter. Any of those things that actually brings you some sort of comfort and makes you feel slightly more, I guess, sort of checked out of just work.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel more in a healthy, probably platform to be and working at. So we take care of that every month. The funny thing is that not everyone uses it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the restaurant may have the tools, but the people are just not interested to use them.
For sure.
So that is also something that I know that the spotlight is right now on the chef and the restaurant. I think at one point also has to be on the individuals that are working, that you're hiring, because sometimes you just don't know, And I think mental health for sure is an issue everywhere. I don't think just on our industry. Clearly, we can see it on the subway. We can see it every day in New York. I just feel that these days you're required to do way more than what you were supposed to do before, and that is for sure time to invest and energy that sometimes you may not have. I run a very small restaurant. We have a very small team, and I'm part of the prep. I'm part of every day. I do orders. I hang out with my staff. We're all together. So sometimes it's also understanding like what is it that you can do and things that you cannot do.
Any of you have a stipend in your restaurants that's like for life balance? Because certainly kitchen life balance is an enormous challenge, right? And encouraging that is really hard.
I don't think it's actually difficult to do. We're only a 45-seat restaurant. We have a stipend of 150, so
Right,
know.
you mean you're saying for other people to
Yeah, I
test
just
it
think
and
it's
try.
like I wasn't the first one to think about it. It came also with my manager, and then we were like, "This is a great idea." We take care also of $75 on their phone bill because everyone these days is working on their phone, and the restaurant should be paying for part of that. If you can't do health insurance for everyone, which everyone knows that sometimes like $10,000 a year each person, then that means that we can do something in a small way to contribute.
Other thoughts?
We have an employee platform that.
Can you hear her?
Can you hear me? Yeah. We have an employee platform program that focuses on free mental health care, how to navigate things in your apartment, how to understand whether or not your pet needs to go to the vet. I know these all sound really random, but they're all kind of like life hacks that we often all need help with, and we have an employee platform that kind of addresses many of these things. It's called EAP.
EAP, that's like, I used to work in American Express, that'd be like employee assistance program, but
Yeah.
is that created by, is that a bolt-on, is that a third party that you
It's a
contract?
third party, yeah.
And what is the third party?
Sorry, no, that is the third party.
EAP is
Yeah,
the third party?
yeah, yeah.
Huh,
As far
that's
as I
interesting.
know, yeah.
And you pay for it and your
Yes.
employees can use it for free?
Yeah.
Here, let me give you this one, because we
Oh. There we go. So I have, there's a few resources that I've used. I'm also really I'm here to share as many resources as I possibly can, because there are a lot. And I think, Ayesha, as you said, no one really has the time to do this research. But I want to share some things. So in terms of mental health, employee wellness, I actually shared with this group just last week. One of the unfortunate consequences of some mental health issues within my own personal restaurant circle has been suicide. I had 3 friends who committed suicide in the last month, and they were all hospitality workers. And the thing is, I know I'm not alone. I know we've all heard or experienced someone in our life having issues around their own mental health and wellness. So the resources that I wanted to share are Kased Wellness. It's a wonderful program. There are free and low-cost options.
can you spell that?
Yes, Kased is Khesed.
Huh.
Kased Wellness. They are awesome. They right now are in 3 different states, one of which is Michigan, which is my home. But also they are expanding rapidly. I expect them to be in the tri-state area very soon. And we often do referrals to them through Restaurant Workers Community Foundation. People ask us where to go, mainly because they launched a program last year where they gave pro bono services to restaurant workers all across the country for mental health services, which is awesome. They also do, I believe, a corporate wellness program where mental health sessions are $60, and as a restaurant, you can pay any percentage of that you want for your employees if you so choose. The other is Restaurant After Hours, which is a New York City-based organization. They have peer support groups, so it's always a great thing to refer out, right? You can't always be the chef and the therapist and. So it's one of those things where, you can share that with your employees. Restaurant After Hours, they're an amazing organization. And they also deal a little bit with substance abuse related issues as well. Also down that path is Ben's Friends. Some of you may know it. Again, peer support, addiction services. There's probably a lot more. Oh, CHOW. CHOW is the last one. CHOW. It's an acronym. It stands for, I believe it's Culinary, Hospitality, Outreach, and Wellness. Again, free, low-cost resources for your employees and yourself.
Amazing. Going back to what Victoria is saying, it's a lot of us restaurateurs have some budget to do some things, and we have none for other things. So one of the things that we did was we had, everyone, if you're a chef or a restaurateur that has regulars, and these regulars are tied to really big companies, we just reached out to them and we said, hey, we're happy to can we do something together for a discounted rate? And SoulCycle actually picked up on it, and they offer to our employees a discounted rate for membership or free classes on off hours. So most restaurant workers are off hours, so that works. And another thing that we implemented, which was free of charge to us, but very grateful to salaried workers, was one time a month, we give them a 4-day work week. So on that, it rotates. If you have 4 or 5 sous chefs, if you only have one, then they get it maybe twice a month if you're lucky. And obviously it's depending on what the business needs. But that one day a month, I see a lot of people take advantage of it, and they either plan a 3-day weekend, or they go somewhere, they make reservations for somewhere that they haven't been able to go. But trying to come up with ideas of how to help them, or anyone, have that work-life balance that you were talking about.
I mean, I think that's one of the questions. We've been talking about some very specific things like inside the workings of a restaurant. But there's also the question of, is there a different way to look at the way the business is structured, whether it's 4 days on and 3 days off? Are there different models of ownership? There's a cooperative model, Kiki, that you were talking about. So do you want to, if you have other thoughts on, I know that Victoria, you have thoughts on the 4 days and 3 days.
Well, I mean, I think that 4-day on, 3-day off has been going on for many, many years. I remember working in England having that because people were doing 60-60. So you do 60 hours at lunch and 60 at dinner. And we used to work 18 hours a day. So I come from a more regimented old school background, but at the same time, you want to do the 4 days, 3 days off when you have staff. The problem these days is that you can't find labor. So it's very difficult to do that if you actually don't have the hands. I think that's one of the main problems that everyone has. And the other one is also how to retain talent. One of them is to get them, and the other one is to retain. So I think it's also a perspective of how to mentor. We go back to the same. If you're mentoring correctly, you can retain staff and not have a revolving door that a lot of people have these days. I think time is for sure of an essence right now, that people do focus on that. No one wants to spend the same time I used to spend in kitchens or what I spend right now. And it's valid, everyone needs a personal life. Or give, birthdays off, something like that also does help. For some people it is something special, and then we should celebrate that too. I just think it goes hand in hand with the people that you can hire.
Yeah.
Sure. So there's a lot of things, I think. I had mentioned to the group last week that I come from a little bit more of a radical mind when it comes to the business model for restaurants. One of my restaurants, for example, was a tipless establishment, and we had a service charge. And we also did tip pooling, which is obviously not something that as an owner I can decide, but our staff decided that it was something that they wanted to do after I gave them some information about it. And it ended up working out fairly well. Mind you, it is not a one-size-fits-all equation. I did not have investors in this restaurant, so I didn't have anyone to make unhappy except for myself and my business partner. It was very difficult at first, mainly to provide customer education about why we're tipless. It was also a conversation with staff. This is why we're tipless, when a lot of them are used to, coming from restaurants where that's what they rely on. It was a lot. And I say it's not a one-size-fits-all model because there's a lot of different models, I think, that can affect change in various ways. Dana had mentioned cooperative models, which I had also had talked about with the group last week. Again, kind of radical, right? Not with the true capitalist mindset in mind, but it is something that I'm seeing a lot, especially in Detroit, where I'm from. People are starting to kind of push the needle on that and trying to figure out how to provide equity, and in that way also provide generational wealth to a service industry of mostly in Detroit Black and brown workers who do not have access to these kind of resources. So that's another way.
Do you want to just give a one-sentence definition of how that cooperative model works in case, I'm sure everybody does know, but in case they don't.
Yeah, so worker-owned cooperatives, there's a lot of different ways to structure it, but essentially workers are the ones who own the restaurant. They are the ones who determine the policy. They're the ones who make the decisions. That probably sounds very, very, very scary. However, it's a percentage of ownership. There's other ways you can structure a cooperative. It could be, for example, I've seen community-run cooperatives where, say, like a neighborhood or a community organization owns the cooperative. Various ways to structure it. The way that I'm talking about specifically, though, is the worker-owned model, where workers, for example, might be full-time and then they get a certain percentage after, say they vested for a year or so. So that's kind of how it works. And it's interesting because it also, you have to have open book policy, right? Everyone has to understand what's going on from a business perspective. So there actually is an education involved when it comes to learning how to run a business and why certain decisions are made. And the people who are actually involved, the workers who are involved in these cooperatives, begin to run the business themselves. This is something that they own. And there is a sense of ownership that also is a sense of pride. And so what we've seen, just in research that has been done around this, is that there is actually like a general sense of wellness and happiness when it comes to understanding that like this is something that I worked for and I own versus this is just something that I clock in to do. So again, a little bit radical, but it's really interesting to see the research on it.
I forgot where we are. Where are we? That was a lot.
We're just talking about, are there models that existed in the past that are good to bring up for the future, or models that we've seen that are new models, like a cooperative model that we see, or different, people are opening earlier and closing earlier, which actually helps with work-life.
Actually, that model is happening in Spain right now.
Yeah.
I think I was mentioning that
You did,
last
yeah.
time. In Spain, people go eat late, like in Chile, it's the same. People don't actually open before 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. So a lot of people trying, even though I think sometimes Europe's way more delayed in a lot of things, in a lot of ways, they're trying to do also the let me open a little earlier, close a little earlier, so I don't have my staff waiting around for one tasting menu that's coming around 10:20. We do the same. Actually, we are closing earlier because 1 or 2 tables is not worth the money to also the health of the staff to stick around for what? So I think actually understanding how the business model is changing too and how the city is changing. There's not really a late night crowd anymore. And thank God we're also not actually, trying to go and find that kind of, group these days. So yeah.
Right, it does seem, and I don't know if it's your experience, but in New York, there's a lot of people opening earlier and then closing earlier, much better for the staff. Less late nights, and the diners want to go out earlier, right? Like that 5:30, 6 o'clock seating, which used to be like so hard to shove people into. They're like, no, it's not like I'll take it. It's great. I think that's like partly the pandemic. Well, I have one last quick question. I'm really interested in education and the role that education plays in the restaurant in terms of motivating retention and keeping people inspired. And you each come from a very specific, deep point of view. What role does education play in this new model that we're talking about? I'm going to start on the Melissa end.
I think education for us, that we do put a lot of money towards education because we are, right now we have one restaurant and it's a casual pizzeria, but the next restaurant is a fine dining Italian, and it's not necessarily a subject that everyone's always comfortable with, and we've always realized that. So we put towards a lot of effort, a lot of reach out to our purveyors and to people in the industry to assist us with that, as well as our staff. We try to do weekly and daily education things, even if they're small. I think just like anything else, little things start to add up and they become something much bigger if you put effort towards it. I engage my sous chefs to do the same, and we will often have like a weekly presentation on something, a subject matter, whether it's something regarding a region in Italy or what have you. Unfortunately, I feel like this is a revolving door of like, you just have to put energy towards doing it. And that's your choice, or it's not. And it's not the most awesome thing because it's not like, oh, here's this thing that makes all this come together and happen. Like, unfortunately, it just takes a lot of being thoughtful and putting energy towards having that for your staff. But I think the greatest thing is to really understand that reaching out to like your friends and colleagues and people that you buy from, they will assist you in that. And most people are really, really happy to come talk to your staff about something either that they grow or they make or they have in their family, what have you. There's many situations, but I do find that if you do engage with people around you, they come up to bat for you as well.
I think we have time for one more answer. So if anyone will. Good.
We've been successful, as like Melissa is saying, to have 2 purveyors a week come in.
Wow.
So whether it's on the beverage side, the farming side, or a food purveyor, or someone in business come in. But one thing that we're trying to implement for the salaried employees is teaching them like how to read a P&L. We're very transparent with our finances. And I think that the more that you know in business, the better it is for you. A lot of people are young chefs, and someone says, hey, I have money, you want to open a restaurant? And of course you jump at the bit, but you have no idea what it takes, and 250 lines in a P&L, and you have to know what each one of them are and what category and what they go in. But we've also trying to teach during pre-service some fiscal responsibility for the cooks. What it's like if you save $100 a week or $200 a week, or what kind of free plans there are out there for some kind of economic classes that you can take to just better yourself. And I personally wish that I had that at a young age. And I think that people that are going, I graduated from the Institute of Culinary Education and spoke to Rick many occasions on saying that you should have a class like that, especially in the core of people that are going through the program, because I think it's really important to know that you're going to take a pay cut if you're someone that's switching careers, or how to manage your money until, there's many, many years until you make a substantial salary that you could actually afford your rent in 1 or 2 paychecks.
Yeah.
And what do you do between now and then to be okay with that and still be able to buy a knife and go out to dinner and watch a movie? So that education is really important, and to reach out to any kind of resources that you can to help you.
Any resources to share?
I'm trying to think.
And it's fine if not. Okay. Well, guys, I think that's it for us. Thank you so much. Thanks to this incredible panel.
Thank you.